Well, good afternoon, everyone. Some of you are probably wondering what's left to be said after listening to all this for the last 2 or 3 weeks. As you know, I'm occasionally rather parsimonious with my comments, and I thought it best to wait until this was behind us before having a more open discussion with all of you about what we've just witnessed. Let me start by saying I don't think any of you doubt that this was the most partisan of exercises. We all fully remember, and it's been said numerous times, the Speaker said roughly a year ago, you shouldn't go forward with an impeachment that was not bipartisan. I've watched her very carefully over the years. Our leadership positions have overlapped, and even before then, we were working together on appropriation bills back in the early days. I'm pretty sure she didn't want to do this. But the fact that she was pulled into this direction against what appeared to be her political instincts a year ago underscores that this was a purely political exercise. Now, having been dragged into something she instinctively felt was a mistake, then the second impulse was, let's get this over with as quickly as possible. Get it out of here, get it over in the other body, and let them deal with it. So that's why you had an abbreviated, truncated rush job over in the House. But even during that abbreviated period, it was pretty clear that they amassed a significant body of evidence from witnesses, which you heard them argue about over here frequently. They provided with us in the House record testimony from 13 witnesses, depositions from 17 witnesses. Then, of course, we added on top of that 180 questions. That we witnessed 193 witness video clips and 28,000 pages of evidence. So I asked my staff to count up the number of times we heard from the House managers during their presentation, how many times it was already proven. There were 60 times, 60, in which House managers said during their presentation to us that the case was either proven or proved, 60 times. There were 33 more times when one or more of the House managers said the evidence was overwhelming. So where did the nonsense about witnesses come from? I have a pretty good idea. After this thoroughly political exercise left the House and came over to the Senate, there was a lot of poll data taken. How are we going to sell this to senators? How are we going to sell it to the American people? Even though we already have all of this testimony and all of these witnesses, what polls well? Why, of course, if you ask the average citizen whether they think there ought to be witnesses in a trial, you're going to get an answer that you want. So the Speaker, I gathered, decided to sit on the impeachment papers after arguing that this is a matter of great urgency and the president needed to be removed from office as soon as possible. Sit on them for a month to laughably think that that somehow gave me leverage to concede their principal political argument, which was this was all about witnesses over here on our side. Well, that brought one of those rare smiles to my face, which you witnessed, in which I was perplexed by the strategy that was being employed. Finally, when it became obvious to everyone it was an absurd position, Democratic senators were saying, why don't you send the papers over? Some of our own members were saying it before they got slapped back into line. The papers came over, and we knew full well this was all going to be about witnesses. I had said to my colleagues back in December in anticipation of the impeachment that their strategy would be to get it out of the House quickly and to leave it in the Senate endlessly, so that we'd have that wrapped around our axle indefinitely. And my suspicion was that it wasn't so much about President Trump, but rather about taking the Senate. And my counterpart, Senator Schumer, finally in the last few weeks pretty much admitted it to all of you that that's what this was all about. It was about taking the Senate and about trying to bog us down in this and to try to get my guys to have a lot of tough votes. So I'm proud of my colleagues for seeing through that, for knowing that even though if you ask a typical voter, should there be witnesses in a trial, they'd say, sure, of course there ought to be witnesses. That it was really about not the president, we all knew he was not going to be removed from office, but about trying to take the Senate. And so I'm proud of my members for resisting the temptation to go down that path, for also preventing what the second strategy was. It was pretty clear the Democrats, if they couldn't win this, wanted to embarrass the Chief Justice, try to drag him into this maelstrom. And the way that could have been done, obviously, was with a 50-50 vote where he would have been accused had he chosen not to rule, which, of course, I can't imagine he would have, but it's pretty clear that would have dragged the Supreme Court right into the middle of the maelstrom as well. So we've reached the conclusion. I think this was a thoroughly political exercise from the beginning to the end. And the final irony of it all is the Speaker was right in the beginning. Because here we are today in a position to judge the political impact of this. Since it all started about politics, how did it end about politics? The president has his highest approval rating since he's been in office. I can tell you as a poll watcher who's looking at polls and certain Senate races, every one of our people in tough races, every one of them, is in better shape today than they were before the impeachment trial started. So I'm not sitting here predicting what will be the biggest issue in November, but I can tell you this. Right now, this is a political loser for them. They initiated it. They thought this was a great idea. And at least for the short term, it has been a colossal political mistake. Manu?
Several of your members have been critical of the president's conduct, saying it was inappropriate, shameful, as Lisa McConnell said. One of them, of course, today said he would vote to convict the president on abuse of power. Mitt Romney did. And for you, why is it okay for the president to ask another foreign country to investigate a political rival?
Now, Manu, I've been responding to you for years. And you know that what I'm here to talk about today is the political impact of this. We've completed it. We've listened to the arguments. We've voted. It's in the rearview mirror. And I think what's appropriate now is to weigh, since it all began for political reason, the political impact of it. And I think it's pretty clear what I've already said is where we are right now. Yeah.
Is there room in the Republican Party for someone who votes for the president's conviction?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but I still think that we had a great teamwork on this, and I think we're in a good position going into our Senate races and the presidential race with regard to this issue. There may be plenty of other issues between now and November, but I think we're in pretty good shape right now. Yeah.
Leader McConnell, some of Speaker Pelosi's top lieutenants are already talking about next steps, subpoenaing John Bolton. Is there a serious political price to pay if they don't move on after impeachment?
Well, you know, I've watched these impeachments over these investigations over the years by both sides. I really think the American people are more likely to focus at this point and for the rest of the year on what kind of shape is the country in? How are you feeling about things? Are you better off, as President Reagan put it, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Yeah, I think the investigations will go on. That's sort of what Congress does. We've done it when we were in the majority and there was a Democratic president. They've done it. I wouldn't expect that to stop. I think in the end, it's not likely to have much of an impact on any of the races, the presidential or the Senate races. Yeah.
Donald Trump Jr., just to follow up on Derek's question there, is calling for Mitt Romney to be expelled from the Republican conference. Is there any chance that Mitt Romney is expelled from the Republican conference as a result of his vote to convict?
Yeah, look, I was surprised and disappointed, but we have much work to do for the American people. And I think Senator Romney has been largely supportive of most everything we've tried to accomplish. Yeah.
Why is there this reluctance to engage specifically on the issue of the president's conduct? Was it acceptable for President Trump to ask the leader of Ukraine to investigate the Bidens and subsequently hold up military aid? That specific question.
I'm sure you were paying close attention, but that's exactly what we've been talking about for the last 3 weeks. Yeah.
Obviously, you and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had a lot of disagreement about how the trial should go. And how would you characterize your relationship with the minority leader coming out of this, and has it been strained?
Yeah, I think the relationship is fine, but adopting the Clinton rules didn't serve his purpose. So let's go back to what he was trying to achieve. He was very forthright about it. We had a discussion before we began the trial. He wanted to guarantee at least some number of witnesses before we started. I felt that our best interest and the best interest of the country was served by listening to the arguments and going through the questioning period before we got to the question of witnesses, because we might or might not conclude at that point that we needed any witnesses, because we had a mountain of evidence headed our way that they referred to repeatedly, which was the best argument against additional witnesses. I mean, how many times did they have to say the case was conclusive? What was the line? Proven, or proved, or overwhelming. Now, when you listen to those kind of arguments being made by the managers, you scratch your head and say, now really? Do we need to hear more? So that was the difference. We weren't angry about it. He was trying to achieve an outcome that he thought helped him win the Senate. I felt the Clinton precedent made more sense, not only for the country, but for us. Yeah, David?
Can you talk a little bit more about why it was so important to you, not just to make sure the president was acquitted, but that you had a united conference, which you almost had, voting to acquit the president, and how fear of the Republican base for your members that are in some tough states may have helped make that decision?
Well, first, I obviously hoped that the result in the Senate would be similar or exactly the same as the results in the House. And I think the message there is don't do partisan impeachments, which, remember, is what the Speaker said, and she was initially correct about it, what she said sometime back. We don't want this to become routine. All of us looked at a number of things the founders said when they put impeachment in the Constitution. And they really were concerned about it becoming a kind of routine effort based on policy differences or personality differences. Sound familiar? I mean, the main thing that drove Andrew Johnson's impeachment was they just didn't like him. Sound familiar? I mean, that's the kind of thing, it seems to me, the founders did not want to happen, that we'd get into a routine of doing this all the time because we had a policy difference or a personality difference. So I'm glad it ended the way it did. I hope the message to the House of Representatives, don't do this again. Yeah.
How long is Senator Romney going to be in the doghouse?
We don't have any doghouses here. The most important vote is the next vote. Cheryl.
Can you talk a little bit about what is on the Senate's agenda going forward? And given the obvious animosity between the Speaker and the President at last night's State of the Union speech, do you think that this Congress can really accomplish anything legislatively with this White House?
My biggest problem is accomplishing it with this House of Representatives. As you all know, we were pretty different approaches to America's problems between the House and the Senate. I think we've got a chance to do some more business. I certainly hope so. We're looking at infrastructure, we're looking at a parks bill, we're looking at land and water conservation. There are, even in the midst of the election, some things that I think we can do together. And even though several of you have completely bought into the notion that we're somehow totally dysfunctional, I would point you back to the end of last year. There were a number of dramatic bipartisan accomplishments in the overall spending bills at the end of the year. Admittedly, they didn't move across the floor independently, but in that bill were a huge number of priorities for both sides, and those only get negotiated on a bipartisan basis. So I don't buy the notion that the Congress is dysfunctional. We have some big differences. I mean, look at what the House passes and look at what we do. We do have some big differences, but we'll get some more work done for the American people on the things that we can agree on, and then they'll settle all of this in November and decide who they want to lead the country going forward. Yeah, back in the back.
Senators Collins and McConnell have a resolution to extend the deadline to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Is that
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
the Equal Rights Amendment resolution from Senators Murkowski and Collins to ratify that constitutional amendment? Is that something you'd be open to putting on the floor?
To ratify what?
The Equal Rights Amendment?
Oh, I haven't thought about that. I'm personally not a supporter, but I haven't thought about it. Yeah.
Will the Republican go after the Bidens after the impeachment? Will the Republican Party go after the Bidens after the impeachment?
Will we do what about
Go
impeachment?
after the Bidens.
Look, I don't tell the committee chairman what to look at. One of you suggested earlier the House is probably still in the investigatory business. I can only suggest that the Senate could choose to do that as well, but we don't have a dictatorship over in the Senate, and I don't instruct the committee chairman as to what to take a look at.
Mr. Leader.
Yeah.
So you have avoided answering the question that Manu asked several times, including twice today.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to make it the third time?
Well, you just praised your members for taking difficult votes in a political environment. It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask whether or not the president's actions were appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's what we've just dealt with for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. We've listened, we've voted, we've had a number of internal meetings to discuss all of this, which you all ended up knowing a good deal about and writing about. It's time to move on. This decision has been made. As far as I'm concerned, it's in the rearview mirror, and the consequences of it in terms of the future are up to the voters of the country to decide who they want to lead the government for the next 4, and in our case, with the class, 6 years. I'm going to take one more if there is one. Yeah.
Leader McConnell, what do you make of the fact that the House vote was bipartisan against the impeachment, and in the Senate, you had the opposite, with Senator Romney being the only GOP?
Yeah, I think I think they're pretty clearly party line both ways. I think that's what you can take out of it. Pretty much party line in both chambers. Thanks a lot, everybody.